When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, Wingspan. User, Cutoff88. Posted, May 21st, 1998.
I never figured I had much to say worth hearing, and I ain't really the kind of guy who wants to share with strangers, but a story I read a few months back, right here on this thing, shook something loose in my brain, and it's been gnawing at me ever since. Back in the late 70s, I spent a lot of time drunk. It ain't something I'm proud of, but after my wife took off with the kids, I didn't have much else to hold on to, and I certainly ain't know how to deal with it. So I spent my nights out on that makeshift porch I had with a six-pack trying to drown out the silence. I'm not saying all this to make excuses, though. No, I say it because for years, I chalked up what I saw to all that booze and a bad headspace I had. Figured I'd imagined it, like a lot of things you try not to think too hard about when your life's already gone sideways. But then, a few months ago, I read a story right here about a grandmother claiming she saw a bird big as a damn plane with black wings and red eyes. Hell, I think back in '76, I saw it too. It was the summer, July if I remember right, and I was living out near Lubbock, still trying to pick up the pieces after the divorce. Had myself a little trailer on a few acres of scrubland, cheap, ugly, and quiet enough that I could sit out there and pretend my life wasn't a wreck. Most nights it was just me and old radio, couple of six-packs, and the kind of dry heat that makes you feel like the world's closing in. There wasn't anything special about that night, at least not at first. I'd just downed my second or third beer, racing for a buzz while sitting in a rickety lawn chair, staring out at the yard. The moon was bright, the air was still, and the stars looked close enough to touch. Then I noticed it, a smell. Ozone, sharp, electric, like the air before a thunderstorm. Problem was, there ain't a cloud in the sky. The smell got stronger with every second, eventually making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was like the world was trying to tell me something, but I didn't know how to listen, or maybe I didn't want to. I reached down to crack open another can, and as soon as that tab snap echoed across the night, I heard that son of a bitch. A low, heavy whoosh, not the wind, not a plane, something else, something alive. At first, I didn't see a damn thing, just sat there listening to that sound, trying to figure out what the hell it was, where it's coming from. Then its shadow crossed the yard. It was big enough to swallow my truck whole. I froze, just sat there with the beer in my hand, watching as this thing circled lower and lower. The wings were massive, stretched out across the moonlight like old tattered sails. They moved slow and steady, each beat sending a shiver down my spine. Then it came into full view and my stomach dropped. It wasn't no bird. I mean, it was, but not the kind you'd see in some Encyclopedia Britannica bullshit. Its body was thick and hunched over, covered in feathers that gleamed like oil in the moonlight. Its beak wasn't only long and sharp, but was blacker than the space between the stars. And its eyes, Christ, its eyes, they were red, glowing faint like embers in a dying fire. They weren't just looking at me. They were seeing me, like it knew every mistake I'd ever made, every bridge I'd burned, every person I'd let down. They pinned me to my chair like I was some kind of insect, and it was deciding whether or not I was worth squashing or playing with first. I don't know how long it circled. Could have been seconds, could have been hours. Time didn't mean much with that thing overhead. But then it dove. The first pass was slow, almost lazy. It skimmed the yard, its claws dragging through the dirt like it was testing me. This got my heart hammering, though, and finally I jumped out of my chair and grabbed my daddy's old shotgun I kept by the door. I ain't afraid to admit it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the damn thing. But as that monster came around for one last pass, I managed to get off a shot. I don't think I hit it. Hell, I don't even know if I could have heard it if I had, but it was clear as could be that bird didn't flinch, didn't even pause. It just landed about 20 feet from the porch, folding its wings with a sound like leather creaking. It stood there, staring at me, its talons digging into the dirt. I could see every detail, the curve of its beak, the ripple of its feathers, the way its breath came in slow, heavy puffs. I felt like a mouse staring down a hawk, knowing there ain't nothing I could do but wait. And then it screeched. The sound was low and loud, rattling through my bones like a freight train. I dropped the rifle and stumbled back, damn near falling over my own feet. Before I could do anything else, though, it spread its wings and took off, disappearing into the night like it was never there at all. The next morning, I found the claw marks it left in the yard, deep gouges in the dirt that didn't fill in for weeks. I told myself it was just a big bird, maybe a trick of the light, and tried to forget about it. I think I did a pretty damn good job doing just that, but now, after seeing that grandma's story, I can't help but wonder what the hell was out there.
Subject, Wolfman. User, 50 North. Posted January 12, 1994.
First thing you need to know is I'm a cop. If anyone knew this happened to me, I'd be out of a job, and I like my job, so I'm going to be vague about where I work. All you need to know is that I work in a state where it gets cold in the winter, real cold. The kind of cold that'll kill you if you mess around with it. There's a bar out by the county line where A long time ago, the owner, Mikey, used to have a problem with bikers until a few of our guys cracked some skulls. Ever since then, and this has got to be 20 years at least, cops who drink there get a nice fat discount, and Mikey never has any trouble. Sure, you gotta drive home with a skinful in you, but who's gonna pull you over? Besides, it's snowing for 8 months of the year, and if you tried to walk home in that, you'd be dead before you hit the main road. This thing that happened to me happened last winter. The roof at the bar collapsed because Mike was too cheap to pay someone to shovel it and too lazy to do it himself. It was a real bitch, but what can you do besides improvise? I started grabbing a half rack of Schlitz after my shift and killing it in front of the tube watching Penguins games. Some nights I'd get myself a pint of Jim Beam to keep the beers company and end up sleeping in my chair till the morning. Funny, but I always drink more on my own. Maybe it's because I'm talking less, or maybe it's just because the booze is cheaper, who knows? Anyways, one night there was a full-on blizzard going on outside. It had been a rough shift, mostly domestics and traffic accidents caused by folks who hadn't chained up their tires, so by the end of watch, I was ready to get rip-roaring drunk. Instead of a pint of Jimmy, I went for a fifth and grabbed some Mickey D's to boot. My house is an old farmhouse on a rural route, so I got land in a big plywood barn where I stashed the truck. The wind was howling like a bastard by the time I pulled in, so I made sure to put the big beam across the doors to make sure they didn't blow open in the storm. The walk from the barn to the house was cold enough that the McD's needed to be reheated. I tossed them on a plate and into the microwave for a few minutes. Half the beers went in the fridge, and the other half I stacked next to my chair alongside the fifth. When I say the wind was howling, man, I mean it howled. Growing up, the storms out here scared the hell out of me. I think the howling was some kind of werewolf outside just waiting for me to go to sleep so it could break in and kill me. Nothing could convince me otherwise either. My old man beat the bejesus out of me, told me the only thing in the world I had to be scared of was him, but I would still lay there in the dark, all tensed up, waiting for that werewolf. Being a cop, I'm not worried about Wolfman no more. The worst things walking around out in the big bad world are people, and that's enough. But on this night, it was blowing so hard out there, a little bit of that old fear started coming back. Mickey D's didn't do anything to tamp it down. Neither did the first few beers or pulls of bourbon. Instead, it just fed the fear and made it stronger. There was no reason for it. I was a grown-ass man with a gun, and the only thing out there was the weather, but every time a section of snow slid off the roof and thumped against the side of the house, I jumped. By 11 p.m., the half rack was gone, along with half the Jimmy Beam, but I was strung like a guitar. Then, I heard the banging. It sounded like drums at first, random bashing, like a shitty bar band playing Zeppelin, but the fear made me think of the Wolfman beating his way in. I got all cold in my guts and chugged more of the JB for comfort. The booze fogged over the fear till it was slightly more distant than the banging, and I was able to notice said banging was timed to the wind gusts. It clicked. That could only be the barn door slamming open and shut. Once I'd made the connection, the sound didn't bother me so much, but I was pretty sure I'd locked the barn before coming in. I tried to ignore it for about half an hour, but the constant slamming started to drive me up a wall. The fear was gone now, and mostly I was just pissed and hammered, and that's probably why I did this next part. The walk from the house to the barn isn't far, so I figured I could just slip on some rubber boots instead of friggin' around with my sorrels or wearing a jacket. Tell you what, I regretted that as soon as I stepped outside. The snow was blowing sideways. You couldn't see 10 feet in front of you, and I made it to the barn by dead reckoning, my teeth chattering. Sure enough, both doors were slamming open and closed in the gale. The chill cut right through the booze haze, and I could clearly remember having dropped the heavy latch beam in place earlier. There was no way in hell anything but a person could dislodge it. Guess I got company, I thought to myself. It never occurred to me I hadn't heard any engines for hours, or who might be out there on foot in the worst storm of the year. There wasn't even time to think about that. The last thing I remember is stepping into the barn and identifying myself as law enforcement before everything got swimmy. I know that doesn't describe much, but swimmy is the best way I can put it. It was like someone pulled the plug and my eyes got all wavy. Next thing I knew, I was coming to, but facing the wrong direction. I'd walked into the barn head on, looking at my Chevy, then all of a sudden I'm facing out toward the yard. Complete 180, and I have no memory of it. Even weirder is I'm stone cold sober, and it's not windy anymore. Snow's all blown up against the side of the house, sure, but the storm itself had passed. I didn't know what else to do, so I latched up the doors and ran inside. Now, the next two things I'm about to tell you are the reasons I can't talk about this at work. First thing, I walked into the living room and was just about to drop back down into my chair when I noticed the time on my grandfather clock. It was 4 a.m. Now, you remember when I went out there, it was 11:30, maybe midnight at the latest. Well, where the hell had that last 4 hours gone? If I'd blacked out, 4 hours in regular winter would have killed me, never mind in the temperatures it had gotten down to by the time I went outside. I went upstairs to the bathroom and stripped off to look for frostbite, but there wasn't any. Hell, I wasn't cold at all. It didn't get any time to reflect on that, though, because I noticed something else in the mirror. Running across my belly, left to right, was a long red mark. It looked like one mean scratch, but there was no place it could have come from. It wasn't tender at all, wasn't even raised above the skin, but it bothered me to look at it. It nagged at something in my mind. Wolfmen don't exist, I know that, but I still got no explanation for what happened out there.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.